Richard Dolan, nice to meet you. Thanks so much for doing this.
Very glad to do it.
Yeah, so as a historian and a researcher of the phenomenon UFOs and aliens and abductions, what is the piece of evidence that made you believe that we are being visited by extraterrestrials?
I would say it was very early on in my own research into this. As I've said a few times, I fell into the UFO subject almost by accident. I was, at the time in the 1990s, a pretty engaged graduate student in U.S. Cold War history, studying really U.S. security policy of circa 1950, the Harry Truman presidency. And I just walked into a store one day that had a book on the shelf that talked about the worldwide UFO cover-up. That was by Timothy Good. And I bought the book because when flipping through it, I noticed that there were quite a few names that I had studied in my academic research, departments that I thought I knew their history, and yet here was this man putting all of these things in a UFO context. And I guess my first thought was, I don't like having a big unknown mystery hovering over this area that I was trying to become an expert in. Everyone, even in the 90s, had heard claims of a UFO cover-up, so I thought, is this something that they actually were interested in? Did they resolve it? Did they figure it out? Yes or no? And I just simply decided I would take a few months out of my life to dive into it and decide for myself, and that was my fatal rabbit hole move. What convinced me quickly, very quickly, that this was quite serious were simply reviewing the then available declassified United States government documents through FOIA, through Freedom of Information, which, the FOIA era really began for UFOs in general in the late 1970s. FOIA was strengthened significantly right at the end of Richard Nixon's presidency, and it was not long before quite a few researchers started petitioning the government for UFO-related documents. And to, I think, a lot of people's shock, many documents kind of fell out of that tree, and there was no single document, there is no single declassified document that proves UFOs are alien. There's no document that says, Mr. President, we have an alien incursion in such and such a location. But what I would say is that there are many documents that prove, they do not hint, they don't suggest, but they actually do prove that the U.S. military had engaged and tracked and engaged a large number of objects that can only be described as flying saucers or UFOs, and in a way that got them to a level of very high concern. And that's quite fascinating. So, and then, of course, there's a whole other number of documents where you track these officials discussing the UFO problem in a way that's obviously very serious, all at the same time, we're talking 1950s, 1960s, that the official Air Force releases and government statements all were totally dismissive of the phenomenon.
And why do you think that would be? Why would they be? Are they concerned that it is a off-planet intelligence, or are they concerned of people figuring out their advanced technology?
Well, in fact, I think, in 1997, the official historian of the CIA, was a man named Gerald K. Haynes, wrote an article for the publication Studies in Intelligence. 1997 was the 50th anniversary of Roswell. There's a lot of things going on, and he publishes this article, declassified version of which you can read, and it said, all of those UFO sightings of the 1950s, turns out we were really flying the U-2 aircraft and the A-12 Oxcart, all these surveillance and high-speed, high-performance aircraft, and people were mistaking them for UFOs, and we didn't really want to tell you what they were, so we allowed the public to believe that they were UFOs. That was his argument. And, mainstream media, of course, just lapped it up and repeated it without any critical thought. That was an exercise in total disinformation. And I really do think, I think there's a quote from Bertrand Russell to the effect that a philosopher who uses his skill for propaganda instead of truth is committing the greatest of crimes. And I really do think that was what was happening there. But in reality, there was always testing of advanced aircraft, of course, but we have to ask ourselves, what is the evidence for the kinds of breakthroughs that people were reporting, and the fact that it was being tracked worldwide by all militaries. The United States, the Soviets were tracking their own UFOs. This would be one heck of a secret weapons testing program that would require this much of a level of secrecy. And I'm not saying that we haven't made such some impressive developments in the classified world. I think we have. But when you really look through the long history of these sightings, I think this is my estimate of the scenario. I think what happened is at some point in the 1940s, certainly by 1947, the President, Harry Truman, was informed that we had acquired exotic technology and bodies that did not come from here. This is what I think. And if you are that president, you have to decide, what do you do about that? How do you tell the world? And of course, you're going to have advisors all around you telling you what you're supposed to do, which is that there's no way you can share this information. First of all, in 1947, the Soviets were trying desperately to get their own version of an atomic bomb. They had spies in the system, and they were working. And the United States certainly did not want them to get access to it. The United Nations at that time was, at least for a while, had lobbied to have atomic or nuclear technology under the control of the United Nations. The U.S. answer to that was, no, thank you, we're going to keep this to ourselves. This would be the quickest way to give it to people we don't want. So if the U.S. was not willing to share nuclear technology, I cannot possibly imagine they would want to share something as exotic as alien tech. And the problem is to acknowledge that this is a real thing. I just think that is way too easy to open the door to all of these other problems. Like, you don't want to just let the world know you've got bodies, you've got technology. And I think that's where they were at for the longest time. So I think the problem went deeply classified pretty early on. And we've been in that world ever since. You start down the road of lies and secrecy, then the question becomes, how, if ever, do you end it? It's like a man who's cheated on his wife for a month. That's one thing. He cheats on his wife for 10 years. That's a big thing. If he cheats on his wife for 25 years, how do you unwind that? That's essentially what the U.S. government has been doing. Well, I say government loosely. The national security apparatus, national security state, and the privatized sectors within that now participate in this. This secret has gone to an extent where unraveling it is going to be difficult, and fessing up to the truth, I think, is it's a political problem of culpability, and this is the problem we're in to this day. You know, we're in an era where we're supposedly talking more openly about UFOs or UAP, and yes, to some extent we are, but there's a couple of red lines in this conversation, and to me the biggest red line is the conspiracy/cover-up red line, where the U.S. government just cannot allow itself to be culpable in an 80-year-old massive lie to the world on something of this magnitude. I just don't think that they're prepared for that. We are in an era where you are not supposed to believe in conspiracy theories at all. And, can one imagine the United States president saying, well, don't believe in conspiracy theories, except this one. The UFO one's true, yeah, but none of the other ones. Like, that's just not a policy that's going to work. So they've gotten themselves into a very difficult situation, and I don't know how they're really going to extract themselves.
Yeah, it's just really interesting how, if it is indeed a cover-up, and if aliens crashed in Roswell in 1947, all these years later, they're finally saying that UFOs are real. Now, mind you, they haven't said that extraterrestrials are real.
Right.
They're just saying that UFOs are real, that they're really unidentified objects. And the Pentagon has kind of classified anything as a unidentified object now, right?
Smart move. It's a very smart move. You know, we not long ago, as of this recording, the Chinese were accused of having some spy balloons go across the United States. And the media, of course, were glad to characterize these as UFOs or UAP. And that was really kind of disingenuous, but it was smart because and the U.S. government was happy to characterize these as UAP. And indeed, in the ARRO, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, thank you, those hearings with Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, they referred to these Chinese balloons as UAP also. And that's kind of smart from the point of view of just wanting to bury any kind of anomalous nature of UFOs for real. By doing that, you're just throwing in balloons and you're calling them UFOs or UAP. And I think there's a real psychological effect of that when you do that often enough in the public. You're really just taking the flying saucers out of the UAP phenomenon.
Throwing it under the rug.
Yeah.
I just don't understand why anybody would believe what the government is saying if indeed they have been covering up extraterrestrial life for all of these years. Do they not remember, like, what they've been doing? Like, I just don't get it. And it feels like we're in this loop of a bunch of regurgitated information, and people are just talking about the same things over and over and over again, and it's not really getting anywhere. And we're still on the exact same topic. There's something really deep that's missing from this UFO and alien subject that I haven't quite put my finger on. I mean, I think that I know, but I want to get your opinion on this, on what you think is actually missing from this. Like, we can come to these conferences year after year after year, and it seems like the same questions are being asked, and mostly, for the most part, the same types of presentations are being done, and we're no closer to anything actually happening.
Yeah. It's a great question. I want to answer in two ways. The first thing that you got me thinking of is, why does the government continually get away with this? Like, do they think we're stupid? And my feeling on this is not everyone's of the same level of doing analysis of things. And in fact, most people are just not in a position where they can really actively question the government and, fight the power and spend their lives as an independent researcher getting to the bottom of things. Most people don't have that time. Most people have jobs, they have families, they have responsibilities, and they don't desire to fight the system. In fact, they want to believe in the system. It's easier for them. So there's a huge portion of the population they'll say on one level, yeah, they're all crooks, we can't believe them, but then they do believe them anyway. And I think that's the vast majority of people. Then there's another group of, let's say, very intelligent people, but they are ensconced within the system. And what I mean by that is, if you're an intelligent person and you want to make money in this world, you want to have a successful career, this is what happens. The amount of pressure on you to conform to an ideological belief system is overwhelming in your profession, in your job. And I mean, unless you have some kind of career death wish or you are an absolute fanatical, independently minded intellectual, you're going to conform with that. Even though you're a very smart person, you'll allow your intellect to go in this direction and that direction. But on the UFO issue, you're gonna toe the line because you just know it's the third rail for your career. There's a very small percentage of like self-educated, smart, motivated people who just want to devote themselves into this to get behind the scenes. So those people, yeah, you talk to them and they're like, yes, it's obvious the government's been lying and how could we possibly believe them? But they're not dominating the media. They're not dominating any of the public discourse by and large. So I think that's actually our situation. Now, what you're asking in terms of what's not being said, this is a very strong interest of mine, because I am convinced that the UFO research community is missing most of the important questions relating to this incredible, astonishing topic of UFOs, aliens, UAP. We're at the point here in our public discourse where you see this community of ours is, I think, really being guided by the Pentagon nowadays. And the Pentagon's attitude is, well, but there may be something that's unusual out there. Wow, it really could be. We're going to look into this, and when we get answers, we're going to get back to you on that. That's sort of where they are at right now, which is absurd. It's ridiculous. Anyone who's looked at their interaction with this over the last 80 years knows that they have dramatically, just vastly more information than that. But But there's just, what's not being asked? Well, what's being removed from our conversation? One thing that's removed from our conversation is the entire history of the UFO subject. Anything really through the 20th century I think is almost being expunged or is siphoned out of our conversation. It's as if there was no UFO subject in the 20th century. I mean, it's incredible to me. And when you hear anyone discuss it, for example, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick of the Arrow group, he essentially dismisses it because, well, we don't have good data from those cases. I don't agree with that whatsoever. I think there has been excellent data. But the 20th century has just been removed. So now, once again, UFO are UAP, and it's a new thing, and there's no cover-up. It takes the cover-up, takes the conspiracy out of the whole phenomenon. Another thing that's not being discussed that is every bit as important as the history is the scale of activity of this phenomenon, which is worldwide and dense population of activity. We are so on the back foot here in our poor ability to track these sightings worldwide. We really have, I think there's no excuse. We should be doing much better now. We're well into the 21st century. We are well into the age of the web and interconnectivity and everything else, and there is no excuse. We've got instant translators, different languages. It's really not a big deal anymore. We need data from around the world, but what the data that we do have looks like is that, by my best guess, estimation, tens of thousands of good UFO sightings are probably happening around the world every year. So what are they doing? And for every UFO sighting, how many objects are there that are not even being seen? Because we're clearly not seeing them all. Yeah. So there's, I think, a great deal of activity going on in all regions of the world, over cities, over deserts, over mountains, in oceans, in space. There is no area where these things can't be. So they've got a global capacity and a global presence and they're extremely advanced. So, I mean, you just stop and think. We're in an era right now of a global revolution going on all around us. I think anyone with eyes can see that. And at the same time, something we're not talking about is we're, I would say, blanketed by a phenomenon that is of utterly awesome implications, and we're just not appreciating that.
Okay, so I guess the problem with the government coming out and saying that, let's say that they just wheeled out an extraterrestrial. Mm-hmm. And this is under the assumption that extraterrestrials are real physical beings, yeah, which is debatable. Let's say they just rolled one out right now in front of the White House, in front of the Pentagon, all the news people were there. Because of their supposed cover-up, that's going to create more chaos from the world, right? That's going to create so much distrust within the institutions, as if there isn't enough distrust already there. I mean, there's people saying now that there's so much distrust within these three-letter organizations and within the government, within the Pentagon, that they have to hire outside people to go to these events and talk to people that are paid by the government to put out information, right? Yeah, several of them. So I think that they've really screwed themselves. If extraterrestrials are real and they're actual real physical beings, they've screwed themselves, because if they were just to roll out an extraterrestrial right now, be like, oh yeah, guess what, we've been lying to you guys for 80 years now, since Roswell, or even before Roswell, because apparently extraterrestrial craft has been crashing for hundreds of years now. So I think that is the actual problem. If it was an extraterrestrial that crashed in Roswell, they should have just came out and been like, hey, it's an extraterrestrial. Then they wouldn't have had this problem, because then people would have been aware. But since they think that there's been a cover-up, and then they roll out an extraterrestrial and everyone sees it, that's going to create more turmoil. And that's why I don't think that they're ever going to do it.
I tend to agree with that. I wrote a book on this 13 years ago. I called it After Disclosure. And back then I said, disclosure is a paradox. It's impossible, but it's inevitable. And there's definitely an impossibility, because there's absolutely no motivation for the powers that be to want to give this up. It's just a can of worms, absolute god-awful mess for them. There may be certain inevitabilities about it, though. I mean, I just don't think it's possible to keep something secret forever. Forever. Maybe it is. Maybe certain things can be kept secret forever, but I don't think so. And so the question is, how does that get resolved and when? What I think has turned out since I wrote that book is that we've seen a very significant centralization and control over the flow of information in our world to an extent that I didn't see in 2010 as where we are now. So I think it is actually possible for very dominant narrative control to exist on this. So a kind of controlled rollout of information on a limited basis might actually be possible in a way that I didn't think was possible a decade ago.
Thanks so much, Richard.
What a pleasure.
Appreciate you a lot.
You bet.